Now I want to go to my guest here in the studio, Liberal MP Julian Leeser joins me. Good to see you again, Julian.
Good to see you, Chris.
I just want to go straight to something that's been brought to our attention, some fresh vision in from Brisbane. This is the electorate office of LNP member Ross Vasta. He's in the seat of Bonner, suburban Brisbane, and this shocking vandalism seemingly directed because he's a supporter of Israel. Is that the way you read it, Julian?
That's exactly as I read it, Chris. This is, in my view, a terrorist act. We have seen too many of these acts that have occurred against members of Parliament. I don't think we've seen them in Queensland before. We've seen many of them in Victoria and some in New South Wales. And we've seen most of them directed at government MPs. So to see this directed at an opposition backbencher like Ross Vasta is particularly disturbing. I think the government hasn't done enough to protect the offices of members of Parliament. I don't think they've done enough to ensure that this sort of conduct, which we've seen all too often in Australia by people thumbing their nose at the law, I don't think the government's done enough to bring this to an end.
Well, they shouldn't have to protect these offices, but these are disturbing times and we're seeing a lot of this sort of thing. As you mentioned, a lot of the attacks in the past have been at government members. This is largely pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel protesters who have targeted the government because they don't think Labor's done enough. And now they're obviously targeting Ross Vasta as well. I haven't spoken to Ross and I'm not certain on what he said and done on this, but in many... It's irrelevant, right? It's just this sort of targeting is disgraceful.
No member of Parliament, regardless of their politics, should be subjected to this. This is bad for our democracy, it's bad for their staff, but it's also bad for constituents who want to get in and see their members of Parliament about Centrelink and the NDIS and migration and all the services that members of Parliament provide. And this is not what Australian democracy is about. We solve our disputes peacefully and through the ballot box, not through intimidation, violence and lawlessness.
Now, just on this, I've been very critical since October last year about the government's lack of action against the hate speech and the threats and the protests directed at Jewish Australians and at others. And I've often said that they've done nothing. Well, there is an update on that. In recent weeks, authorities have actually laid charges against a few people over Hezbollah flags, over signs that decry Israel as some sort of a Nazi state. Relatively minor charges, but some action happening. Does this give you any comfort, or is this to show you it's a classic case of too little too late?
Well, this is the exception, not the rule, Chris. You know, right from the 7th of October, we should have been seeing government agencies getting tough. I've been asking a lot now, where is the Attorney-General Mark Dreyfus? He's responsible for the security services, he's responsible for the federal police. There are federal crimes that have been committed. Has he spoken to the federal police and told them to step up their game in this regard? Has he been speaking to his state counterparts and asked them to step up their game in this regard? I mean, the standard we walk by here is the standard we accept. And too often in this country, we have seen anti-Jewish protests turn violent. We saw those dreadful scenes in Melbourne a few months back with relation to the Land Forces protests, where police were hit with chairs and cans and doorknobs, and horses had spray put up their nostrils and so on, and we saw so little action there. I'm getting sick of this, Chris. I think Australians are sick of this too. We want more action from our government and from our agencies.
It is deeply worrying. On related issues, I want to get your reaction to the announcement from Donald Trump that Mike Huckabee, the former Arkansas governor, is going to be appointed as ambassador to Israel. Remembering, of course, it was Trump last time that he was president who moved the US embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. Is this a sign of strengthening support for Israel?
I think it's a very good sign for Israel. I think it's a very good sign for the Middle East, and it's a very good indicator about what Donald Trump's priorities are. One of the very first appointments he's made is a new ambassador to Israel who's a strong supporter of Israel. The signature policy of the Trump years was the Abraham Accords, which has had a transformative effect in the Middle East. That's got to be the way in which US policy continues. That's the way the world needs to start looking again at the Middle East. Cracking on with that is the direct thumbing our nose as the West to Iran and their proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah.
Spot on. Thanks for joining us, Julian. I appreciate it. Julian Leeser there, Liberal MP.